My name is Mapendo Tumaini, and I am a senior over at Buffalo State University, and I'm majoring in urban and regional planning while pursuing my certificate in GIS. Um, I am the lead intern leading this speaker series today, and I like to thank Bernice for giving me this opportunity to do this, to learn much more about zoning and the Buffalo Green Code. My interest in planning and architecture started from when I took a design and drawing for a production class in my freshman year of high school, and I don't think I can say that I would have been interested in planning without that class or anything like that. So that is it about me. I'll be graduating in May from Buffalo State, so I'm pretty excited while terrified at the same time. Today we'll be speaking with Bernice Radle. She is the executive producer over at Preservation Buffalo Niagara, which is leading this speaker series. And we have Chris Hawley, a city planner and an urbanist, and they're they're the two creators of the Buffalo Green Code. They wrote it. There are speakers today. okay. Thank you for joining us today. And please excuse me, this is my first lunch and learn, so I am a little bit nervous. So I want to thank you for joining us today. Anyway, I'll stop sharing my screen now. And
Actually, Mapendo, just keep your screen up there and I want to do a little,
okay,
yes, but put your mic on mute.
yeah, of course.
Okay. Okay, awesome. First of all, Mapendo, thank you so much. And I think everybody on this call, it is being recorded today. I just want to say out loud that as the executive director of Preservation Buffalo Niagara, we are always trying to build up the next generation, right? So when Mapendo was looking for an internship and expressed interest in zoning and planning, I said, perfect, because I have always wanted to do a series on the Green Code and how it impacts historic preservation. So we're going to talk a lot about that today, but I just wanted to say, make sure if you're, Mapendo, you did a very nice job, don't worry, don't be stressed. And we really wanted to put Mapendo on the hot seat a little bit to give her that strength and courage. And there's nothing wrong with that, with empowering interns. So that's why she's here. So I just thought you did a nice job. My job today as the executive director is to kind of give a brief thought behind why the Green Code matters so much to real estate, but also to historic preservation. And I couldn't do this talk without Chris Hawley, because Chris has been so instrumental in the Green Code. And I do want to clarify that the Green Code was written by consultants, although we played a very special, important role in the Green Code. We worked on it. There's 240 some odd public meetings, of which I think we attended. I know I was at well over 200 of them. And I served on the zoning board for 9 years as the vice chair of the zoning board for the city of Buffalo. So I, not only in the creation, but then the implementation side and the discussion side. So Chris and I bring a lot of Green Code background, and Chris will give you a beautiful presentation shortly. To start, I wanted to say why this matters. Okay, so my background has been in real estate for many, many years, and I came over to PBN here to help promote preservation, right? Work in preservation, advocate for historic preservation. But we can't do that without a really good zoning code. And I really don't think people understand how good our zoning code really is. Of course, no code is perfect, but there are so many key pieces in the Green Code that actually elevate historic preservation. And we're going to talk about that over the next couple of like these lunch and learns about zone. We won't give it all away today. I'm sorry about zoning, because there's several. This is a 3-part series. But the point is, without this Green Code, we wouldn't be able to restore these buildings, because the previous code had so many rules and regulations for parking, for lot lines, coverage, all these things that have since all been gone away. And now if you want to restore a beautiful building in downtown Buffalo, but you don't have a ton of parking, right? You can actually do that here, which is amazing. And people don't realize but Buffalo is super special. Buffalo's zoning code is so like good and strong compared to probably 90% of America. So we are really fortunate here to have a very good zoning code. And I know myself, I've worked in it. We're renovating a building right around the corner on Sycamore. We would not be able to renovate that and preserve and restore that right now if we didn't have this zoning code change that happened a few years ago. So I wanted to make sure we had a series on the green code, on how it supports preservation, on, and I know a lot of people checking in today are real estate folks, how real estate gets impacted by the zoning code and why it all matters. And so I would ask you some logistics. We'll keep it, to an hour, but throw your questions in the chat. Chris and I will be happy to help you help answer those questions. And I'll either do it in the chat or we'll talk about it in real life. But I really want to give Chris the opportunity to kind of talk about the foundations of the green code, and then we can answer any questions, I guess. And so let me, Chris, why don't you pull your presentation up? There we go. And I will give a quick introduction of Chris, if you don't mind, and I'm sure he can elaborate. But Chris Hawley is the preservation planner for the city of Buffalo. And so if you've done any preservation work, you've probably run into Chris. He's also the founder of Eugene V. Debs Hall, and of which I am a board member. So full transparency there, we work together a lot. Chris, the Green Code has been awarded, it's a majorly awarded by the Form-Based Code Institute back in 2019 or 2020. Chris, you can help me out with that. But the Green Code has been awarded greatly. And so Chris has just done a lot of promotion and celebration of this code, and goes way back to the very beginning, the foundations of laying the foundation for the Green Code and getting it moving forward at City Hall. And so we spent 6-7 years trying to get this thing passed, which is a whole other conversation over perhaps a drink. So or some sort of dinner, but today we get to talk about the foundations. And Chris, if I missed anything, please go ahead and add, and I'll let you take it away.
Great. Well, thanks, Bernice. Just to start out, I'm kind of here in my official capacity as a friend of Bernice Radle, and of course of PBN. So I'm not here representing the Office of Strategic Planning. So any opinions I give either in the presentation or in response to questions are my own. Just want to clarify that starting out. But Bernice has a great introduction. The Green Code's been in place now for about 8 years. And I still think that the project is fresh and of the times and progressive and up to date. I think I'm just glad it's still a hot topic. In fact, I just noticed in the opening slide I had to change the name of the mayor and executive director because we've been doing these presentations for a while. It's been a little while actually since I've done an introduction on the Green Code, so I'm pretty thrilled that Preservation Buffalo Niagara invited me here to speak about it. So this project actually goes way back. So this is an image from 2010 when the Green Code was announced as a project on Earth Day and what became shortly thereafter Larkin Square, but at the time was a vacant gas station site in a deteriorated industrial area now known as Larkinville, and which embodied at the time many of the contradictions between the ambitions of the development community and of neighborhood residents to restore our walkable mixed-use neighborhoods, and all of the constraints that were embodied in the 1953 zoning ordinance, which was in place at the time. And so this project set out to completely rewrite all of our land use regulations from top to bottom. And it was supposed to be a 2-year project that ended up being a 7-year project. The whole process of consensus building in a city of 275,000 people was astronomical. And but I think what we ended up with is a consensus document that not only modernized and updated all of our zoning regulations to match our smart growth and sustainability principles, but is also something that the community could defend and be proud of and celebrate. And ultimately, when we did adopt it, I think that in 2017, it really was a community victory. So there are a few components to the Green Code. The whole project really started with the high-level principles of Buffalo's comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 2006. And those principles were I think, still relevant to the present day. It's still the comprehensive plan that we follow in our everyday work at City Hall and in the community. But its high-level principles included smart growth and sustainability, the fixing the basics, building on our assets, and investing strategically. And in order to get to the specificity of a new zoning ordinance, we really needed a bridge between the high-level principles of the comprehensive plan and the specific outcomes in the Unified Development Ordinance, which is the formal name for the Green Code. And for that, we needed this middle piece, a land use plan that took those high-level principles and translated those into goals and objectives that we could then enact in a new code. And Buffalo's comprehensive plan has been in place for a while now, 19 years. And it is an incredibly inspirational document. I keep a copy in my office, handy at all times. But it's also an award-winning comprehensive plan. It's actually remarkable looking through the plan now and actually seeing how much of it we've been able to implement over the past 2 decades. I mean, the whole focus on the waterfront, on creating a 24/7 neighborhood in downtown Buffalo, restoring the Olmsted Park system. That's all work that's obviously still underway, but we've made tremendous progress in the past 20 years. And one of the key aspects of the comprehensive plan was a directive that the zoning ordinance be rewritten to make the principles and goals and objectives of the code credible and achievable. And long before I worked at City Hall, I was an activist with others, including Chuck Bernice, especially. He's actually the person who got me interested in zoning in the first place. And we constantly pointed back to the comprehensive plan's directives as an argument for doing a top-to-bottom reform of the code, which was ultimately a successful argument. But after 2010, that community engagement process began. We had some 244 public meetings, some as large as this one in Lafayette High School, which attracted about 300 residents, to smaller meetings, including sitting around the coffee table in living rooms for block clubs across the city who were interested in learning how this would impact their neighborhood. And the goal was pretty comprehensive: to completely scrap a conventional zoning code that dated back to 1953 and had been overlaid dozens of times and expanded over the years, and translate that into a plain English document that is heavy on illustration, is designed to be easy to understand by laymen and architects and developers alike, and is a form-based code that emphasizes mixed-use, walkable neighborhoods rather than the principles of conventional zoning codes, which focus on separating uses, limiting density, and providing lots and lots of off-street parking. So the difference between a conventional zoning code and a form-based code, in a really simple way, is really kind of what its intended outcome is like. The conventional zoning code is the genetic code that has guided the development of all of our suburbs in the past 70 years. Most municipalities, in fact, Bernice, I would say that 99% of municipalities have a conventional zoning ordinance that focuses almost solely on separating uses, accommodating the automobile, and minimizing density. And a form-based code focuses on a whole different set of priorities: walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods. The intent of the project was also to build on Buffalo's planning legacy. And we have quite a spectacular urban design legacy going back to the city's founding, when Joseph Ellicott laid out the radial and grid pattern in 1804, overlaid onto which is Frederick Law Olmsted's Park and Parkway system, which intended to bring order and direction for development in the areas between the radials in the late 19th century. That gave us some of our greatest public spaces, including Niagara Square, and of course the Parkway system. This is a view from, at the time, actually the top of Gates Circle Fillmore Hospital. We also have a tremendous planning legacy from the 20th century. So the Plan of Buffalo of 1922 was the first comprehensive plan adopted by the city. And it laid out a vision for substantial investments, including the reorganization of Niagara Square as a center for government and civic life. That was implemented. We obviously went from neoclassical to Art Deco architecture in the intervening period. And that plan also laid out the framework for Buffalo's first ever zoning ordinance in 1925, which was much more modest in its ambitions, attempting to remove heavy industrial uses from residential areas and minimizing building height, especially downtown, That gave us the kind of the tapered wedding cake height standards that were adopted in many American cities in the early 20th century, but was not focused on all of the radical changes that the 1953 ordinance attempted to impose. It largely respected Buffalo's existing walkable mixed-use urbanism. And that walkable mixed-use urbanism is really the foundation of what Buffalo's new code is intended to reinforce, and I think is our greatest urban design legacy. This is an image of Tonawanda Street in Riverside in 1932, a very typical example of a mixed-use walkable transit-served place that was much healthier than after the 1953 zoning ordinance was adopted. The Green Code also attempted to respond to our planning mistakes. So we consider the 1953 zoning ordinance itself to be a substantial planning mistake that intended to impose a suburban car-dominated vision on our walkable mixed-use neighborhoods. That the same principles that informed our zoning code in 1953 also informed the catastrophic urban renewal projects that we undertook in the 1950s and 60s. This is the results of the Downtown Urban Renewal Project in 1965. You can see the Erie County Savings Bank and the heart of Buffalo Shopping District being demolished. And also, of course, the full-scale clearance of many of our healthiest and most intensely developed neighborhoods, including especially the Ellicott District, which wiped away some 27 blocks of the city just east of downtown, as well as the old Italian colony behind City Hall. This is an image in the early 1960s, just before the bulldozers got rolling. You can see Court Street on the left and the I-190 under construction. And that was totally eliminated in urban renewal in the early 1960s. In fact, what's remarkable about this is that even a school, which had only been 20 years old when this photograph was taken in the lower right, was also wiped off the face of the earth. And this same line of thinking informed the destruction of our public transit system. The last streetcar was taken off Broadway and Fillmore Avenues in 1950. And of course, we all know about the destruction of Humboldt Parkway for the Kensington Expressway. These are all 1950s and 1960s Jetsonian ideas that ran a destructive path through virtually every American city. And of course, the highway system not only did direct damage to the neighborhoods through which it passed, but also helped enable the depopulation of our neighborhoods as well as our employment centers to create the suburbs on the edge of the city. So we really wanted to start from scratch when the Green Code was adopted. It was the first time we had undertaken a comprehensive zoning rewrite since 1953 when Elvis Presley recorded his first song in Sun Studios in Memphis, Tennessee. And it's the first citywide land use planning exercise since 1977 when John Travolta was starring in Saturday Night Fever. And of course, the code had ballooned to a staggering 1,804 pages, which were eliminated in favor of a much leaner document. So we had a code at the time that was difficult to understand and apply, was poorly organized and written, made it very difficult to invest, and most importantly, restricted walkable mixed-use development, effectively banning the very development pattern that had given the city so much strength over the decades. So walkable mixed-use neighborhoods are the focus now. So this is an example of the kind of development that the last code not only enabled, but required: car-oriented, single-use development, low density, and that made traditional neighborhood development very difficult to do. And now this is the norm. Traditional neighborhood development, mixed-use, compact, walkable, consistent with Buffalo's historic character, is now the norm under the Green Code. There's also this whole notion that rather than tinker with the code, as many cities are doing and are still doing, that we had to basically throw out the old system, put the typewriter in a cabinet and adopt the new technology. So you can't turn a typewriter into an iPhone. We couldn't turn the 1953 zoning ordinance into something that would work effectively for us in the 21st century. So I'll give you a tour of Buffalo's new zoning code and some of its principal reforms. Of course, we've also covered that it is a form-based code. This is actually a term I like to use less and less because I think currently zoning reform as a whole is basically embodies these exact principles, particularly in areas where we want to create walkable mixed-use development. But one of the strengths of a form-based code is that typically they're clear and often illustrated. They emphasize physical development outcomes rather than use separation, limiting density, and accommodating the car. And for that reason, we're able to offer for every one of the 26 zones in the UDO an illustration that depicts under healthy market conditions how a neighborhood should generally look with the code working effectively. And this is just an example, the N3C mixed use center, which shows the principles at work over time in a healthy market economy. And unlike conventional codes that apply a single set of development regulations for every single type of building within a zone, walkable neighborhoods are much more complex, and different types of buildings fulfill different functions, and they require their own development standards. So for instance, a mixed-use building like this will have different design standards than a detached single-family house, and different design standards from a row house, and different design standards from a civic building. Healthy neighborhoods incorporate a wide variety of building types, and they all require tailored dimensional standards to accommodate them. And just as an example, this is a typical mixed-use building in Buffalo. This is actually at the time when Five Points Bakery was here before it moved across the street, but embodies all the characteristics of a traditional Buffalo mixed-use building that we wanted to export into the new code. So this is a building that's built up to the street, generous windows and doors at the ground story, more private second or third story, and a parking is provided at all for it to be in the rear. Very simple stuff. So what the code does is for any one particular building type in a neighborhood zone, illustrates from empty parcel to fully articulated building all of the development standards that you need to know, which is much simpler than navigating 1,804 pages. If you want to design a new building or rehab a building, then typically you have to address only these 2 pages out of the some 334 pages in the new code. Here are some key high-level reforms. Most significantly, and I think most consequentially, the Buffalo Code in 2017 enabled Buffalo to claim the right to be the first major city in America to completely eliminate minimum parking requirements. And since that time, a lot of other cities have done the same. Hartford, Connecticut, South Bend, Indiana. New York City is toying with the idea of doing so for affordable housing. But we were the first to eliminate it entirely. And this has unshackled us from the car-dependent single-use development pattern that had been imposed since the early 1950s, and has allowed us to repiece together again coherent mixed-use compact development that builds on what worked well in Buffalo in decades past. We did, of course, not just adopt like a completely free market approach to parking. Larger projects are still required to submit a transportation demand management plan, which explains what the anticipated travel demand might be and how it might be accommodated. But it's different from a parking management plan in the sense that rather than focus on single occupancy vehicle trips, the intent of the TDM requirements is to focus on minimizing single occupancy vehicle trips and maximizing the use of transportation alternatives, which has been a really effective strategy for the city since it was adopted. And in virtually every neighborhood requires walkable development. So this is a major shift. Our last code effectively prohibited walkable development throughout most of the city. And now throughout most of the city, walkable development is required. You require serious variances to do anything other than this type of development in most of our neighborhoods. It eliminates density restrictions in all mixed use zones. We still have some modest density restrictions in residential zones that reflect the typical character of our pre-1950 walkable neighborhoods. But within mixed use zones, you're basically given a maximum height, maximum lot occupancy, and you can pack in as many residential dwelling units as the market will allow. And that has worked out really, really effectively. This is a great example. I should probably show the built result of this rather than the rendering. But this was the first zero parking project out of the gate when the code was adopted in 2017. 15 Allen Street, only a few hundred feet away from the Allen Street Metro Rail station. Incorporates 2 shops at the ground level and 12 units of residential above. Would have been a very typical development in the 1920s, was effectively prohibited after 1953, and is now legalized and was an as-of-right development when the code was adopted. This would have required a dozen variances and a major headache of a process under the old code, and now a very simple process is assured. The code also legalized small shops in residential zones. This is actually one of Bernice's projects, 172 Rhode Island Street. I think she sold it since, and sadly, I miss this pie shop so much. But was one of the first projects to take advantage of a new allowance in the code that allows for any pre-1953 building up to 2,500 square feet in gross floor area to have reactivated ground floor shops if you can show that a shop was in existence in the building at any point in the past. And because of this, now dozens of shops have opened up, not on neighborhood main streets or in downtown, but nestled among residential dwellings, typical to a pre-1950 development pattern, allowing neighborhoods to become more walkable, richer with amenities, and of course to enable small-scale economic development. We also significantly removed barriers to adaptive reuse of older building stock. This was both in taking less of an emphasis on separation of uses. There's still, of course, use standards and some use separation in the code, as you might typically expect, but significantly lower restrictions on the mixing of uses. And this was a project that took advantage of one of the major reforms in the code, which was an adaptive reuse permit, which allows any building that is either locally landmarked or is listed on the National Register of Historic Places or eligible for the National Register of Historic Places and is at least 5,000 square feet in gross floor area to be occupied by virtually any use, with the exception of certain uses that may be inappropriate, like an adult establishment or a used car dealership. So this is an example of a former mill in a light industrial zone where residential is typically prohibited, but which was enabled, had a mixed-use development enabled as a result quite easily through the adaptive reuse permit in the code. The other major outcome of the code is that it visualizes the intent of the development standards. So no matter where you are, either as a homeowner or a small business person or prospective developer, you can identify the zone for a particular parcel, turn to the page in the document that illustrates the intent of the development standards, and have a pretty clear understanding of what's expected. And this has made the investment environment much easier to navigate for both people making investments, as well as for neighborhood residents who are intending to protect their particular character. I mentioned, of course, we simplified the standards regarding use. Before, you had to navigate 1,804 pages to understand what uses were allowed where, and now it's a simple 2-page chart. We implemented dark sky lighting standards. I actually have mixed feelings about how effectively we've implemented this. We may be looking at some reforms in the coming months that makes this easier to enforce. But in theory, what the code requires is all exterior lighting to be fully shielded and directed downward, so that over time, you'll see more of the night sky. And if you're an urban resident, there's a chance you've seen very few stars. In your lifetime, this has been a source of wonder and poetry and art over the centuries. But as soon as we started introducing artificial light in the night sky about 100 years ago, gradually the night sky and the Milky Way began to disappear. As lighting is replaced over time, this kind of correctional facility type lighting ought to be replaced with lighting that's much more sensitive, not only for people who would love to see the night sky again, but for neighboring residents that find this type of lighting to be a huge annoyance. Without committing to it, among the ideas we're considering is having is simplifying the lighting standards to simply require fully shielded lighting that's directed downward and have required compliance by a certain year. So we can tell pretty effectively when lighting was installed and whether it conforms to the standards. The code also enacted universal shoreline buffers. So before it was applied to only certain sections of the downtown waterfront, but now that these are in place, either 25 or 100-foot shoreline buffers applied to every shoreline, not just Lake Erie, but also Buffalo River, Skagit Creek, and the like. We enacted a policy on how to do complete streets. We are the first city in New York State to adopt a policy to do complete streets. And now we have directly incorporated in the code, not just rules for the private realm, but also rules for the public realm. These are guidelines that intend to show how complete streets ought to be implemented. And I think for people making the investments, having a much more clear and predictable approvals process has helped significantly. If anyone's ever tried to do a residential development in California or Florida, the regulatory requirements are immense. And in Buffalo, if you follow the code, you're guaranteed to have approval at a maximum of 62 or 30 days, depending on the scale of the project. That's a huge value add for anyone making an investment in a business or a new building or a new home in Buffalo. So these are some of the results since 2017. We've effectively legalized our walkable neighborhoods. You know, I talk about, you know, historic preservation law is very different from zoning law, but I think because of that, historic preservationists tend to focus less on zoning as an effective tool. But what zoning does is well, number one, in a typical municipality, maybe only 3 or 4% of your city is locally landmarked or in a local historic district. In Buffalo, it's 4%. What do you do about the other 96? Does the community character not matter? And you need to have good zoning in place if you're interested in preserving and reinforcing neighborhood character before you can really think about historic preservation on a much larger scale and typically laid out in a preservation ordinance. Preservation ordinance touches on a very, very small section of virtually every single American city, even places like Charleston or Savannah. And but this is an example. It's a contemporary house that has been since constructed, but matches the setbacks, typical fenestration, front door placement, lot width, lot occupancy. It's a contemporary example. That it's a building that meets the kind of the spirit of the age, so to speak. But its urban form is consistent with all the houses around it. And that's just one example of the effectiveness of the code in preserving character and not just not you know, simply focusing on you know, what type of window replacement is appropriate. That's the realm of preservation law. The zoning can be effective in addressing community character, which I think is a much more important goal and outcome for a much larger area of virtually any American city. And this, I decided to show my own building. This is when the Green Code was adopted, I started looking around to fulfill my own personal ambition of buying an East Side tavern, living above it, reactivating the ground floor, and Bernice helped substantially, perhaps more than any other individual person, in helping me navigate how to undertake this project. And since it's been adopted, we opened in 2021. And this is an example of a project that would have been very difficult to do under the old code. This is a bar in a residential zone. And we were able to reactivate the ground floor as a nonprofit social club. It's still a bar. Reactivate the upper two dwelling units, one of which I now live in. And it has no off-street parking. And no parking, no problem. None of the city's business. And under the old code, it would have required 13 off-street parking spaces based on the size of the bar and the 2 dwelling units, and which would have required me to demolish the 2 buildings next door to accommodate. So this is just an example of just one of the ways that zoning has this remarkable intersection with historic preservation, and also shows how zoning can be in direct conflict with preservation goals if it's not done well, or how it can reinforce preservation goals. So this is just one example of many hundreds of corner and sometimes mid-block commercial buildings in residential zones that the code now allows to be reactivated with a simple special use permit, much simpler process than the use variance that would have been required under the old code. I think I showed this one before, 15 Allen again. I'll have to delete that slide in a future presentation. The Richardson complex. I just want anyone to imagine what a 600,000 square foot building would mean in terms of the parking requirement under the old code. You wouldn't have, you know, a restored Olmsted landscape. It wouldn't be a possibility. I think this provides maybe 3% of the parking that the old code would have required as a minimum. And this is just another example of how at odds really bad zoning requirements can be for restoring, in this case, a National Historic Landmark, which is still being redeveloped, but which no longer faces any real hindrance in the zoning code. The zoning makes it very easy to rehab. 201 Ellicott, great example. This is another early project that came out after the Green Code was adopted. It was our first really large scale zero parking project. Of course, this is in downtown Buffalo. 201 dwelling units at 201 Ellicott Street, and is a major contributor to the downtown residential base, and would have been impossible to build with the parking requirements in place under the old code. And of course, this also helped enable the dwelling units themselves to be less costly to the occupants, so the rents can be lower. For sale prices can be lower when parking isn't provided. It's a cost that's not absorbed by the developer. It's something that's passed on to the consumer. And having structured or other parking on a site like this would have jacked up the rent significantly. So there's also an affordable housing aspect to zoning as well, of course. So what does the new code do for Buffalo? Well, I think, over time we had these extensive conversations throughout the community that got really detailed feedback on the kind of community, the kind of values we wanted to embody. And any good zoning code is an instruction manual for building out the community's vision. And my advice for any municipality would be, first, understand the vision in great detail, and then adopt the rules and procedures to enact that vision. It's been in place now for about 8 years. I think has been a pretty effective enabler of the smart growth and sustainability principles of the citizenry in our comprehensive plan, and we're awfully proud of it. It was adopted in 2017. By that point, of course, Larkin Square was already in place, and a great example of what the code attempts to reinforce. Great communities, walkable neighborhoods. If you have any questions, that's my contact information. Be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Chris, so much for that. That was so good. I know the slides of the demolition slides for urban renewal, they crush my heart and soul like every single time I see them. There was a question actually from Ayat about parking. It says, how does this affect parking for new construction? And why do driveways have to go to the back of the property? That's a question that's in the chat.
Okay, I see that one. Well, right now, if you want to install parking, you can, and the code goes into great detail about how it ought to be screened, landscaped, and lighted. And but the amount of parking is no longer regulated. So I would say that the quality of parking has a lot of detailed standards, but the number of parking spaces is not addressed. So if you want to do zero parking, God bless you. If it's for a larger scale project, you may still have to implement a TDM plan that shows where the bike parking will go, how you'll encourage more public transit use. One of the more effective strategies that a lot of developers have used is by separating out the cost for renting the space versus renting a parking spot, if any is provided at all. And that's just one method of reducing the demand. So people have to pay for parking. They're less likely to use parking. They're more likely to use other options. So why do driveways have to go in the back of the property? Well, I think one of the principles of the code is to kind of put away the cars. And if you look at any zoning board of appeals docket, I would say about a third of all the items are people applying to put a parking space in front of their house. Sometimes they're approved, most of the time they're not. But generally speaking, we want public spaces to be either green space or for public use, and for parking to be hidden. And that's just a general principle in the code, and is embodied in our ordinance 100%.
Absolutely. And Chris, can you elaborate what TDM stands for?
So TDM as a transportation demand management plan. And as I mentioned earlier, it is simply a plan to show, number one, what the anticipated demand might be, and showing how that will be accommodated, either on the site or within the neighborhood. And it was a way to kind of demonstrate to neighborhood residents that were a bit more fearful about the removal of minimum parking requirements, to show that actually the sky won't fall. The amount of travel demand that the project is anticipated to create is X amount. And here's how we expect it to play out. It doesn't require off-street parking. It doesn't require any particular solution, but it does require an idea or a set of ideas about how the travel demand will be accommodated without placing a tremendous burden on the adjacent neighborhood.
So if I may, I believe the Green Code doesn't really like the fruit belt style attached garage where the parking in the front. But it seemed to me when you have to wrap a driveway all the way to the back, you decrease permeable surfaces and increase surface runoff, putting more pressure on the storms, versus if the parking were in the front, maybe not as appealing, but yeah, maybe some colorful colored concrete or something else, or a garden to offset it, instead of putting more impermeable surface and therefore increasing surface runoff.
Yep. There's always a series of trade-offs with standards. There's not every standard has a 100% positive outcome, and those types of issues are frequently brought up in ZBA hearings. So for folks who are making an argument that that the having a garage, for instance, closer to the street will result in lower stormwater runoff, that's true, and is one of the arguments you can use in trying to secure a variance. And we did hear overwhelmingly that, generally speaking, and I think one of the things about zoning is that they are generalizations, and they don't always work perfectly for every project and for every location, and that's why the variance process exists. So we certainly have a lot of examples since the 1980s of new housing construction being built in Buffalo, and still under the Green Code as well, where parking is more visible and more predominant, but the rules try to tuck it away as much as possible.
Okay, because my local mosque just asked me to help them buy a lot on 15th Street. They have a double on the to the left, and then a rehab single in the rear, and they want to do new construction. At one point, they were denied by the Division of Real Estate for trying to do a garage in a driveway. Now, I think they said they want to do a house with a driveway to accommodate parking for that new house and the other 3 units to the left.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I got, as serving on the zoning board for many years, those are again, conversations, and trying to make a decision about trade-offs is tough. I think the reality is one of the main reasons is that parking, our community character of most of our neighborhoods is a walkable neighborhood, and cars are not at the forefront of that. Cars, most houses actually don't even fit a driveway. I for years had no driveway and 4 feet in between my houses, so it's a real challenge that we struggle with. I think if I was rethinking Buffalo, I wish that we had some more alleys, because alleys would make it a lot easier for us, but we don't have alleys. So when people ask about the Green Code, because people call and ask me about other cities, and I always say, oh, if you have alleys, it's actually even better. We did this without alleys and in a place where there's snow, right? Versus if they have alleys and no snow, it's easier for them, for other cities.
Joseph Ellicott didn't do everything right in 1804. We got very few alleys in Buffalo, relatively.
Yeah.
Even other nearby cities like Niagara Falls, where alleys are typical.
Right. Yes. Other questions from the chat, or if people, James Bernard says, what do you guys see as the biggest market barriers right now that might be preventing even more of this type of much needed development in Buffalo? Oh, I could answer a little bit of that. And then maybe Chris, you can add. So what are the biggest market barriers? That's a very good question. I think overall, the banks are just not lending right now. This is being recorded in 2025. If people are looking at it in a few years from now, okay, whatever. But, in 2025 right now, a lot of the banks are not lending. And so the struggle between construction costs rising, the banks not lending as much, they're tightening up, is basically hindering, I think, a little bit of Buffalo's growth in terms of new construction, sometimes even restoring some of these older buildings. It's just a slower process, and it requires tax credits, and it requires other grant incentives and at PBN, we run a stabilization program. Some of these buildings need stabilization, every dollar you can ever imagine to make these numbers work. So we're still struggling through that, right? As a, Rust Belt, post-industrial Rust Belt city, we're struggling through that a little bit. And I can't speak for the banks personally. I wish it's just the market that is existing today. Now, what we can do to make things easier is updating the zoning code, which we did, getting the tax credits and doing more historic tax credits program, right? More money we can bring to the table. We can see more and more of this renovation, restoration work, new development that fits within the community character. The more things we can throw at it, the more tools, right, the better we will be. And but yeah, so I don't know, Chris, if you want to add anything.
Well, I would say the zoning code is an economy neutral document. It can be damaging, but it can't create demand or investment on its own. So if this were adopted in Antarctica, the results would be nothing. In a very healthy, fast growing city, it would result in a lot of development. But what I think it has done is made high quality development much easier to do. And and has removed barriers that otherwise would have hindered development in periods of high demand and free-flowing money from banks.
Absolutely agree. And I will just chime in, like that little pie shop that Chris posted or talked about. Yeah, that was easy to do because the zoning code allowed it to do. I knew that it would be easy, and it's the zoning code allowed that to happen. Before the zoning code, all of those they still sit vacant. You could see them all over the community, and they're just waiting for a small little developer to come by and say, I'm going to buy this and fix it up. Right now, the code will allow that to happen, and hopefully the banks will get on board and allow that to happen. Right.
Yep. And I think also, I think the more powerful thing about a form-based code in particular that really focuses on objective standards and process is that it offers people making investments certainty and predictability, that they follow the rules and procedures, they will get approved, and will face a much easier approval process as a result. And relative to most of America, that is a powerful economic development incentive to kind of take headache out of people's lives and make it very easy to do high quality urban development. Now, if you're a conventional suburban developer, there's a lot of headaches in the code. And if you wanted to do, a drive-through restaurant or a single-use strip plaza in a mixed-use neighborhood center zone, that is, it's designed to make that difficult and make walkable development easy. So if you're in the business of doing walkable development, whether it's reactivating a ground story shop in a vacant building or constructing an entirely new mixed-use building, the process couldn't make your life a whole lot easier. It's a very simple process.
Absolutely. Let's get Jesse Smith had a question. Over almost a decade that the Green Code has been in law, have you seen any real cultural shift among developers in the sense of fewer substantial variance requests, et cetera? As an outside observer who doesn't see minor site plan reviews, et cetera, I still see a lot of big projects combining multiple lots and asking for maximum lot width variances, putting the front door facing the parking lot instead of the sidewalk, but maybe, et cetera. So has the Green Code succeeded in changing attitudes towards urban development?
I think in general, it's been a huge success. I need to update this statistic, but a couple of years ago, I looked through all the minor site plan and major site plan review applications to determine how many of them even requested variances. And it turns out 86% of projects did not even request a variance. And so I give that a B plus, or maybe a B, depending on whether 86 or 87 is a B or B plus. So I think there has been a shift. I think early on was the most difficult, especially when there were a lot of projects already in the pipeline, fully designed, required 15 variances, and with a lot of developers and investors perhaps testing the city's commitment to the principles of the code. But I think since then, if you look at any ZBA agenda now, I kind of joke that the Zoning Board of Appeals has become the front yard parking pad and sign height, review body.
And fences.
And fences. And we're even thinking about changing the fence requirements just so we can eliminate those variance requests. And so we're seeing fewer and fewer of the kind of large scale setting asides of the code and kind of just going on your own way. And most variance requests now are for fairly minor issues, literally regarding whether a fence can be 1 foot higher than normally allowed, or whether a sign can be 10 square feet larger than allowed. And of course, we do still see a lot of requests for front yard parking. But I think overall, though, I'm really proud of the code. We see projects come through this office all the time, and I see the code working effectively 8 or 9 out of 10 times, and that's a pretty good track record.
Yeah.
So yes, I think that the culture change has been evident.
I'd like to add a couple.
I just wish at the moment, only because we're in a slowdown nationally in terms of lending, that we were seeing a lot more projects than we have been seeing lately.
Yeah. I'd like to add a couple things from a small development perspective, because that's kind of where I came from before here and still doing some stuff. But is that the small developer world, it doesn't really hit all those thresholds. So we don't do minor site plan review, right? We're not really, maybe you're doing a repair permit or a renovation permit, right? So you won't actually, you don't see those site plan reviews because they're not required. So there's the small scale developers doing the 2 and 3 and 4 units all over the city, you know, or owners, that's a big deal. And they're following the rules. They're, for the most part, renovating and not putting parking on. They're just, oh, there's a 3-unit that's vacant. We're just going to renovate this. Just like that little pie shop, you know, I didn't need, so we don't even trigger any like review, which means it doesn't get in the news. It doesn't do Buffalo Business First. You know, it's just these little, so I feel like, I mean, even my 11 unit on Niagara, no parking at all. You know, it just was being renovated because it could be, because the zoning code allowed it to be, because the minimum parking requirements were removed. But that's not in the news, right? That's not, you know, so I think that's, and Sycamore around the corner that we're working on right now, this, again, there's no media or news or site plan review because it's so small. So it doesn't kind of facilitate a bigger conversation. So I would say in the small development community, you know, that seems to be, people seem to be very thankful for the green code.
I would
And
also add maybe a little self-criticism too. Like I would say that we're doing well, that things are doing well. Like some of the fundamentals of walkable mixed-use urbanism, a lot of projects coming through the pipeline that embody the principles pretty effectively. But there are many things that we haven't done as well and that we're now able to reflect on and consider. So, you know, what some of the things that makes the green code green, like tree conservation. We just haven't been requiring, you know, existing tree inventories for new construction projects. And I routinely see trees being removed that ought to be replaced in kind. And it's just not happening at the level it's supposed to. I routinely see projects that should have required bicycle parking and it's not there.
right.
You know, the street tree requirements are being applied without 100% accuracy. So there are some things there are some problems. And so I don't want to paint a utopian picture of the code's implementation over the past 8 years, but I think at least though we know what those are, and we'll hopefully be addressing them in the coming months.
I agree. And I wanted to add one more thing, which is important. We have to remember form follows finance. Okay. Form follows finance. So the form of your building, the form of your project is dictated by what is going on in the world of finance. So I think about these big projects a lot. And you're right. I mean, Jesse is right. The developers, some big ones bring 5 stories when it's 4 or 3 stories is allowed. And, you know, they come down a story and there's all this conversation and uproar about it, rightfully so. And, you know, what they're thinking about is, oh, my elevator is very expensive and I want to have 1 elevator, not 2. That's what they're thinking. They're thinking finance, right? What the expenses and the code. And I'm not giving them any excuse. I'm just saying kind of what's going on in their mind is, how am I financing this, or what are the expenses on an annual basis so I can make this building be valuable enough to build. So it's just, sometimes you see that stuff. And we're seeing all around the country, the 5 over ones are everywhere. I think we're actually so fortunate to not really have many of them. You know, these standard block buildings are being built everywhere, and Buffalo has retained so much of its character just because, I think because we are a little behind, you know, but that's will be a good thing for us in the long run. Deborah Wagner asked, I got in a row, what's the current maximum fence height? 6 feet. It's 4 feet in the front, 6 feet in the back. And there's some rules on the, I think it's 4 feet until 20 feet back, and then 6 feet allowed, I believe. It's 20 or 15 feet.
Yeah, it's either 6 or 4 feet, depending on the placement of the lot.
Yes. So most people actually install a 6-foot fence in their front yard, and then they come to the zoning board and they're like, well, I didn't know. And actually what happens is they're not required to have permits. The permitting process needs to be adjusted. So they put the fence in and then they get written up, and it's sort of this reverse issue typically. I'm not always, but typically. So we'll have them cut it down, or, you know, depending on what the zoning board decides. Deborah Wagner asked, does the Green Code define lighting standards for roadways, or does that fall under some other guidance?
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a draft of the Green Code that ultimately wasn't adopted that applied the dark sky standards to street lighting as well. It was removed. It's unlikely we're going to be reinstalling it, but there is an opportunity in the coming year or two when the city intends to take over the luminaires on our streetlights from National Grid, and what products they buy will determine whether or not we ultimately get the reduction in light pollution that the Green Code intends. So streetlights are the biggest source of external light overall in the city, and not having the dark sky standards apply to them is a problem. But if we simply, I've been pushing for it, at least to the extent that I can, if the new lighting can be dark sky compliant, then we'll make tremendous progress in reducing light pollution in the city.
Yes, that's very well said. Well, I want to be conscious of everyone's time. Just don't go away just yet, everybody. So we're going to do 2 more of these. Okay, so next month we'll share it and post it out loud. But we're going to have like more implementation of the code. So I'm actually going to deep dive into that little pie shop and how we made that happen with zoning and thinking through that process. I'm going to invite some other small scale. I'm trying to get actually a lady panel, like of women developers, because they're usually not represented as much. So I'm going to get some women on there that have been renovating and doing projects on that. So just keep an eye out for that. We will send an email out to you that you attended, that of the next one, so you have it. And I thank you, Mapendo. Thank you for putting this together.
Thank you.
Yes. And Chris, thank you so much. I appreciate you. So, and thank you all for coming.